Good morning. Today we'll look at James chapter 4 as we continue reading through the New Testament. And in chapter 4, he starts to talk about pride. He says, where do fights come from? Here, Tobias wants to get a look at everybody. There he is, proud big brother as of Saturday. But anyway, he says, where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desiring pleasure? And it's very true that, so much of what goes on in the world is because we want more. Yeah, Tobias, I'm on my video right now. Okay, you go sit with Grandma for a minute. He says you lust, but you don't have. You want the things that you don't have. You always want more, and that's so true that we do. We want more, and what causes the wars in the world? It's the desire for more power, for more land, for more wealth, more whatever. And he says, yeah, you fight and you war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. And he's talking about prayer. He's talking about people that are, when they pray, they're praying more for selfish desires than they are for God's presence and for God's will. And he reminds them of that. He says, you ask and you do not receive. Why? Because you pray amiss. You pray for your pleasures. And then, he says, adulterers and adulteresses, don't you know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? And he doesn't mean, and I don't think, that we're totally separated from God because of the desires of the world are like the desires of the flesh, and the world, our earthly being embraces, the sin and the evil and the bad, and we see so much in the world that says that, what is evil in the eyes of God is good, or is okay, is acceptable. And, God's ways and the ways of the world are so different. And we are to love God and love our neighbor. And, both of those are difficult things to think about and to remember. But, so often the source of conflict between people of the world is the desire for more material things, and all of that going on with everything that way. And he talks about humility. Starting in verse 7, it says, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. And that's so true. When we embrace God, when we say no to Satan, that's true. But just like it says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. When we draw near and hold dear to ourselves the sins of the world, the Satan and the temptations, and when we fall into those temptations, they become more near and more dear to us, and it just seems to be easier in so many ways to just keep on doing those things instead of turning away from them. And I've got a note in my Bible of Ephesians 6:11, and I looked to see what that is, and it's put on the whole armor of God, and to protect ourselves from the evils of the world, from our sinful desires, and just that whole armor of God helps us to draw nearer to God, to know all of what it is that God would have us do and be and say, and to learn how to be content with what we have. I'm not doing a very good job of holding my phone here this morning. Sorry about that. But we are to be a little bit more humble and not to think so much of ourselves. He says, cleanse your hearts, purify your hearts, lament and mourn and weep, and be aware of our sin, to be aware of our separation from God because of all of the things of the world. He says, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. And it's hard to be humble, and there's a song, goes, oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. Well, we know we're not perfect in every way, but we need to remember that little bit about humility, that we we can't save ourselves. We're reliant on God, and that we aren't going to have everything that we have and that we need. And sometimes, often, when we pray, we are maybe a little selfish in our prayers. And that's what James is saying about some of our prayers here, is that we're not praying for God's will, we're praying for our will. And it's really hard. But I mean, when I pray, I know that I don't always pray maybe 100% what God would have and everything that way. I let Him know what I want and what I feel, and my emotions and my hurts and my fears and my concerns. And in the end of all of it, it's, thy will be done. Yeah, and that's one of the important things, I think, for us to remember as Jesus taught us to pray, that phrase, thy will be done. Um, to remember that it's not our will. Our wishes aren't always, even though they may be beneficial for us, may not be beneficial for the world and for everyone else around too. So it's to be humble in our asking for what it is. And the next part of this chapter, starting on verse 11, he reminds us not to judge each other. Don't speak evil of one another. It's a kind of a reminder about that tongue, and how the tongue says so many things, and compares the tongue to the rudder of a great ship that we just read here yesterday. And do not speak evil of one another. And when we speak evil of someone, or when someone speaks evil of us, it's impossible to get that corrected so that it's forgotten, so that it isn't hanging over somebody's head, and I've had people tell me things that I've said, and I'm pretty sure I didn't say it that way, and I'm pretty sure I didn't do that exactly like that. But I've got people, I've had people tell me that. So, it's to make sure that what you're saying is true and accurate. It says, James writes, he who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. And so it's just that reminder to be very cognizant of what we say and what we think about others, and when we hear something about others, maybe to make sure of what true is. And I think sometimes, like I mentioned about myself, that if people heard both sides of the story, they would come with a different conclusion than what they've had listening to one person's side of the story in so many ways. So it's a reminder, we don't judge each other, don't speak evil of someone else. And in some ways, even if something is true about someone, it'll say in the Bible that if it doesn't build someone else up, don't bother to say it. If it's maybe even if it's the truth, but it's going to tear somebody down, or it's going to, we should just be quiet about it, and don't judge, because we're not so perfect ourselves. The very last thing in this chapter, James writes about, don't boast about tomorrow. Don't plan too far ahead in some. You just to kind of live for today in so much of what goes on. And he says, if you're planning so far ahead in everything else, and forgetting to live for today, I mean, tomorrow's not promised to any one of us. It's not promised at all. And so it's to make sure that we live the very best life we can live today for the betterment of all. It says today or tomorrow. It says one who says today or tomorrow we're going to do this and this and this, we're going to go here or there. We don't know what'll happen tomorrow. He says, what is your life? He says it is a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes. It's like, in the morning sometimes we get up and it's foggy, and we wait and hope the sun comes out quickly and burns that fog away. And, when the fog is gone, it's gone. And so he's saying that's the way our lives are. I mean, they're very temporary here on this earth. So to do the very best we can with them, and to live today for today. We can't relive tomorrow, and we can't pre-live We can't relive yesterday, and we can't pre-live tomorrow. So live for today, do the best you can, and remember that we seek God's will, and not always our own, not always our own interests and everything in so much of that, but to be community, and to be humble with who we are. So I guess that's good for today.